right. Well, welcome to the latest edition of Founders Talk. Paul Ellis is the CEO and founder of Foundry, a company, a commercial real estate services company located here in Orlando, Florida. Paul, it's always important for us to say why we exist. What we do is we work with early stage or entrepreneurs who are in the early stages of building their ventures to help them make those ventures sustainable, but then also to create positive social, environmental, economic change. One of the things that we believe is that Orlando has all the tools and resources to be a hub for social entrepreneurs around the world. So no matter where they're from, they can come here, plug into the right resources, the right people. That's the reason why you're here, because we want to highlight you to help us prove our case. And so we want to say welcome to the talk, to the chat, man. You good?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
All right, good. All right, well, Paul, we love to jump into these things with the same question always. It's a question that throws people off because you probably haven't thought about it in quite a while.
Oh, good.
But Paul, talk to us about baby Paul, right? Thinking back about baby Paul, toddler Paul, and
I had the same hairline. I had the same hairline as baby Paul. So,
oh man, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it made me think if I had the same hairline, I have to go check. But one of the things we want to do is when you talk to us about, when you think about who baby Paul was, what were some of the influences, some of the things that were around you that you felt like cultivated you, nurtured you into the human and the work that you do today?
So kind of as I was growing up, is that kind of the context
Wherever
of it?
You want to start? I mean, if you think of yourself, the 8-year-old Paul as baby Paul, that's good.
Yeah, I mean, wow. Yeah, you really that wasn't on the list of questions that Casey gave me. So you're throwing the curveball fast, which is awesome. So you know, my growing up, as I reflect on it, I mean, it was not very healthy, to be 100% candid. I mean, I grew up in a my parents got divorced when I was 7, and it was a pretty challenging environment. My mother was an alcoholic, and my father was, I think, in some sense did the best that he could, but wasn't necessarily a great father. So those kind of formative years, I think for me were probably that kind of classic search for meaning, if you will, right? And so I tried to kind of pour myself into things that would give me, and obviously, this is kind of the result of reflecting back, but I kind of poured myself into things that would give me that affirmation. A lot of it was in football and sports, and I was pretty good at kind of what I did, and always was maybe, a little bit smaller and a little bit slower than everybody else. So it kind of taught me that, but I had control over how hard I worked. I had control over the effort that I would put into a thing, and it made me that was an early kind of lesson learned, if you will, driven out of the wrong pursuits, right? I mean, it was pursuing things, in the world, if you will, that would kind of give me that affirmation. But it did teach me that, I controlled my effort. I had choices to make, and in terms of how hard I was going to work at a thing, and I had some early success in those efforts that kind of gave me that affirmation that, quite frankly, I was looking for in my family that I never had. So I think in terms of a life lesson, if you will, that has kind of shaped the career is that realization that one of the things that I always control in business is my effort, right? Now that can always, we can go down a whole nother rabbit hole about how that can get out of balance and what I pursued and what have you. But in terms of creating a successful business, effort is just such a huge part of it, right? I mean, we talk about it, in our production roles and what have you, that, if, and particularly from a sales standpoint, and whether you guys all acknowledge it or not, you're all in sales, you're all in marketing at some point, right? And we talk about it all the time. If I make 75 cold calls and you make 50, I'm probably going to beat you. I'm probably going to win. I'm probably going to build a more successful business in that context, even if you're better at certain things than I am. So that effort thing is a really powerful lesson. It's also something that has to be controlled, because it can get you out of balance pretty quickly. So that's probably the biggest lesson from baby Paul that I can pull from.
That's amazing. I'm knee deep in trying to teach my kids effort leads to production. And so if you came out of childhood with that, it wasn't a wash, man. That's pretty good.
Yeah, it was. No question.
Paul, did you feel like you had to put in more effort because you were behind the 8 ball, or was it because you felt
I think if I'm honest, I mean, I think early in my life, right, whether it was kind of middle school or high school, I was searching for that affirmation from my family, and I wasn't getting it in my family. I wasn't getting it, so it was from those outside influences, right? I mean, it was a real, again, in some sense, it was the wrong motivation, right? But I was just looking for somebody to tell me, hey, you're really good at this thing, whatever that thing was. And so, it kind of drove me in sports, and it drove me in academics, and it drove me in my friendships. I mean, my friendships were, in some sense, probably more important than my family was, because my family was, kind of so broken. So some of it was negative, but as you get older, you can kind of turn those things into positives. I think did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's perfect, because I want to understand how does that lead you into commercial real estate? Because I took a look at your LinkedIn profile. I saw that you had like a little thing in it which says to me that you can see when I looked at it. I was like, that's kind of unfair. But you're one of those people who pay $1,000 to be able to have that capability, and that's pretty cool. But I looked in there and I was like, he's always been in commercial real estate or somewhere involved in it. So how did you get from that? How did that lead you off into commercial real estate?
Yeah. So, I was able to go to the University of Florida, the greatest university on the planet. Sorry, Carl. So I was, I went there with kind of a standard. I'll get a business degree or what have you. Didn't really have, actually, quite frankly, I started in computer science. And that was back a long time ago, right? Where we had floppy disks and all that other stuff. And so that was always an interest of me. And then the summer of my freshman year, I interned in an engineering firm. And by the end of that internship, I was like, I want nothing to do with this. This is a horrible space for me. And didn't really enjoy it. So kind of pivoted to business. And but pretty much everybody in at least my circle at that time was in business and getting a finance degree, and I just wanted to be a little bit different. My dad was in real estate; he was in residential real estate, so it was kind of interesting. And Florida had one of the first kind of real estate tracks, and one of my fraternity brothers was in it, and he was really smart, and I really kind of looked up to him, and I said, "I'll do that." And it was probably more just to be different than anything else. And so really kind of fell into it and really ended up kind of loving it. And so and that track was really more about real estate appraising. And so I came out and I was able, because of my degree, I was able to accelerate pretty quickly in real estate appraisal, and did that for about 2.5 years. The industry changed pretty dramatically. I won't bore you with that whole story, but ultimately got to a point where I was, I had a decision point where and I realized I really loved the commercial real estate aspect of it, but I kind of hated appraising. And it was, and at the time, Trammell Crow Company was hiring, and back in the late 80s, early 90s, Trammell Crow was a legendary kind of real estate firm in the country. And Mr. Crow, Trammell Crow, who was the kind of the founder of that business, was really really influential in the space and had created a great company and a great culture. And it was really, really hard to get into. And so I literally cold called them for 4.5 months, just begging. And I think the people that hired me would tell me they hired me just to make me stop calling on them. I mean, I just kept pounding and pounding and pounding, and finally got a shot and got in kind of the early 90s and just kind of took off from there. So that's kind of how I got into the commercial real estate.
Yeah, that's so I see how your effort played out in you moving into that business. I
would call it more stalking and like it was uncomfortable for them, I think, at some point.
Yeah, so that's interesting, right? Like there's a fine line between good effort and stalking.
Professionally persistent. Yeah, professionally persistent.
Professionally persistent. So there was something at some point, was we all know that you went off and started Foundry, which I would say is probably one of the larger commercial real estate services companies in the Southeast. Why did you make that switch? If Trammell was the be all end all, it was prestige and all that stuff. Like, what was it about that environment that you felt like you could just do better, or you wanted to do something different? Like, what was that? Talk us through that.
Yeah. So I would tell you, I'll kind of talk about, a little bit, where we are today, which, we can talk about where Foundry is today, but is nowhere near where I ever imagined myself being. So I never really had this kind of burning desire to be, a risk-taking entrepreneur, if you will. I was at Crow for 15 years. I was a partner at Crow. I was one of the youngest partners within Crow at the time. I was running our North Florida business, which was Orlando, Tampa, and Jacksonville. And like in 2006, we were rocking. I mean, it was just a blast. We had a really, really great team. We loved each other. We cared about each other. We worked together. We'd kind of grown. A lot of us had grown up in the industry together. We had a high level of trust. Why would I ever leave that, right? And then, I describe, this day in October of 2006 as kind of the perfect day, right? I had, this business that was doing great. I was, felt kind of full in my job and my career, and had one of those, work-life balance days where I left the office early to go coach my son's flag football team, and came home and I worked out, right? So I had all of, I'd hit all my targets that day, and walked into my den, and my cell phone was going off and my email was going off, and it was, I had to be all the partners of Trammell Crow had to be on a conference call at 9 p.m. And I looked at my wife and I was like, it's never good when they're calling a conference call at 9 p.m. out of the blue. And that's when we found out that Trammell Crow was selling to CB Richard Ellis, which is, both were big global firms, and CB was buying Trammell Crow. And that's a whole nother lesson story and what have you. And as a shareholder and as a partner in the firm, it was a fantastic deal. I mean, it was a classic kind of, the markets were peaking in 2006 and my house isn't for sale, and they made an offer that we couldn't refuse. And so I understood it financially. Personally, it was a horrible thing, right? I mean, I was going to lose. It was an acquisition. It was not a merger. And when it's an acquisition, the culture becomes the acquiring culture, and everything was going to change, and we were going to be put in our lanes, and and it wasn't kind of how Crow was. And so it caused a crossroads that none of us really were expecting at the time. And so that crossroads, and that's probably a theme for us that we talk about a lot within Foundry, is that, oftentimes the worst thing can become the best thing, right? And that was a worst thing in October. But by February of 2007, I think all of us would look back and say it was the best thing that ever happened to us. And we'd had no idea what was going to happen, right? I mean, in 90 days, 90 to 120 days, we had formed a new company because we knew we weren't going to stay, at the existing company. We met our obligations and we weren't locked up. In the public world, a lot of times we were not locked up, and that was, Crow did a really great job for the partners. They said, we need you to help us transition this deal, but then you have a choice and we want to support you in whatever that choice is, which is very unique, by the way. It was a testament to their culture. And we end up saying, we're going to take an entrepreneurial shot and try to start a commercial real estate firm, right? And that's kind of how it happened, Kyle. It wasn't some grand plan that I woke up, many years ago and started to design. It was like, boom, you're at a crossroads. And I remember, part of my process in making that decision was I met with a lot of, friends and, peers and mentors and what have you. And one of them is an attorney in town. And I was telling him, about kind of the choice. And he's a longtime friend of mine. And he said, man, I'm so envious of you. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, the company I love just got sold. Maybe I have a job, maybe I don't, maybe I can figure this thing out. Where this is like a horrible moment. And he's like, no, God's clearly put you at a crossroads. He goes, I'm an attorney. I just work until I feel miserable and know I need to make a change. So I was like, oh, well, that's an interesting way to look at it, but it's true. I mean, it was a crossroads moment for us. And ultimately, we had this one shot. We had a lot of different opportunities, and we had this one shot that was a partnership with CNL, and it was the entrepreneurial shot. And all of us kind of got to this point. There were 12 of us. I mean, you announced me as the founder. I always try to push back on that because I wasn't. There were 12 of us that really founded this company, and we all looked at this one shot and said, that's the deal that we'll look back 3 or 4 years from now and go, I wish we would have tried. I wish we would have taken that shot. That's kind of how we crossed the line, if you will.
I love that, because it doesn't matter like what scale or what background you're coming from. There is an element of risk when you're starting something. You can mitigate that risk a lot of different ways, but at some point when you're going to start something, there is I'm taking a shot here, and either I'll make it or I'll miss it. And it's cool to hear that you had that moment. I wondered too, like, there's a couple of the fellows on the call who are transitioning or have in their history working in a corporate environment or working for a group of people and then going to start something. And I know that like that real estate is its own kind of thing, meaning there's a skill set and there's a way to do it, whether you're working for a company or on your own. But I wonder if, with the 12 of you, the role that you took there, what changed for you when you were working for the company versus when you were building your own? Was there a big change, or do you feel like your workload was about the same? Did you have to learn any new skills in that?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, boy, there's a lot. When you work inside, a company, a lot of us had this. I mean, you've got a brand on your card, and if your brand is well known in the space, to get you into doors, right? I mean, and when you start a new thing, and we started it. We certainly took a risk, but we started in a joint venture with CNL, so CNL was backing us, and all of a sudden that. CNL has a great reputation and a great brand, but it's kind of localized, and a lot of it was around the bank. I mean, most people knew CNL as the bank. That card didn't get us into places anymore. Those are big moments, right? And for a lot of us, your ego kind of gets popped a little bit, right? Because you kind of went like, well, I used to get into all these places, and now I can't get in there anymore because nobody knows what a CNL commercial real estate, and that's how we started as CNL commercial real estate before we lifted, out and became Foundry. But I would tell you, I'm still learning a lot of skill sets, right? If I ever get to a point where I've got it all figured out, that's probably the decline, right? I mean, I am still learning a lot, and when you're growing a company. From start, and we literally grew it from zero in revenue, right? About every, depending on, you can, I don't know that I can give you exact metrics, but when you go from 12 employees to today, we're 400 employees, right? There's every, call it 18 to 24 months, every, 20 to 50 new employees, every 10 to 20 million dollars in revenue, all of a sudden you're running a completely different company. So you are constantly, if you're not constantly learning and adjusting and able to embrace change, and as you all are developing your companies, what you'll realize, depending on the scale that they become, you'll always be like every 18, 24 months, all of a sudden you're running a completely different company, right? In terms of governance, in terms of scale, in terms of access to capital, in terms of needs and what have you. So you're always learning how to become a better and better leader, if you will. You can either pick up those skills on your own and you can try to go figure it out or learn it, or you can really focus on bringing in great people that can do those things better than you can.
Paul, I want to go backwards just a little bit.
Okay.
But in this case, going backwards is good. You said your card no longer worked because it just didn't have the luster, the sheen that was required in order for you to make it effortless.
Yeah.
And so you had a card that people look at and be like, well, what is this? How did you change? How did you get into the door? Was it that what was it about your messaging that had to change, your activity that had to change in order to get you into the door? Like talk to us about that, because I'm assuming that in terms of messaging, you had to convey something that was uniquely different than anyone else in a way that was compelling enough to say, okay, I'll let you in the door.
I'll take a shot. Yeah. That's going to be everybody's struggle as entrepreneurs. And I'm sure you guys are all going through it in some sense, right? You kind of need that first shot. So yeah, my card wasn't going to get me in the door anymore. I still had skills. My team still has a lot of skills. That's one of the reasons we had confidence in what we're doing. We felt like we were really good at commercial real estate and kinds of the expertise that we brought to the equation. Quite frankly, we felt like we had some of the better folks in this market, right? And again, this is early. We're just focusing on kind of Orlando and Tampa and Jacksonville. And so we really, Kyle, I think the right answer is we just needed that first problem to solve. We needed somebody to trust us to say, okay, I've got an issue and I'm going to hire you and I'm going to, and you're going to solve that problem, right? Because that's what we do. We're a service provider, right? We weren't into the development business at this point. We're just trying to provide service brokerage and leasing and management and what have you. And so we needed a handful of folks to kind of just decide, okay, we're gonna give you a shot, and we got it, right? And fortunately, they were some larger institutional capital, and in our space, if you can make inroads in the institutional capital space, then people start to take notice, and they say, okay, well, if they could solve Prudential's problem, then maybe they can solve my problem. So we just need that first problem, and so it's funny we kind of go through this because as we open a new market, they all go through the same thing. It's like we're sitting in, I'm going through it right, now in Dallas, and we've got this important client that is taking a shot with us. And, one of our pitches is like, the good news for you is you're our only problem we have to solve in this market, right? Like you're it. We're throwing everything behind it. And when we had those first pitches, there were 6 of us in the room, and we were looking right at the customer, and we were talking about their problem, not about us, because there was not much to talk about us, right? And that would be, I would say, if I was transitioning a lesson to your teams, right? There's a tendency when you go to market to talk about yourselves, and the big platforms, that's what they do, right? They talk about themselves and how big they are and how much scale they have and blah blah, blah blah blah. We have always trained ourselves, and Crow, some of this comes from Crow, to really just talk about the customer's issues. And I'll talk about myself if you ask me questions about it, but I'm here in this pitch to really focus on your problem. What is the issue that you have to solve, and how can we help you solve it? And so that training, really kind of drives into, really as we open new markets or what have you, is we gear everybody up and say, just keep focusing on what the customer's issue is and how can we solve it and how can we get better at it.
Paul, do you think that because you said building trust, somebody building trust with them, or you building trust with someone enough for them to give you a shot, right? And so there's a risk on their end. And so what is it? Part of it is, do you feel like part of the building trust process was helping them to understand, like talking about their problems? What was the elements of building trust for you? Was it a combination of team and highlighting expertise? Was it a combination of how your approach was to talk about the problems and to make it feel more boutique and intimate? Like what was that?
It was. I would tell you, Kyle, it was the good thing about starting a thing from scratch is you have to customize everything, right? So if a customer is sitting through 3 pitches and they see CB and they see JLL, they get their rack pitch, right? Let me tell you about, we've got 100,000 employees and 400 offices and blah, blah, blah. And this is us, this is us, this is us. Well, we walk in and there's none of that, right? There's like 6 of us in the room. And we go right into, this is your problem. And by the way, we're going to solve it in a different way. Here's our solution, right? We're going to take a stab, right? We're going to take a stab at what we think your issue is. And we're going to customize a solution to kind of solve that issue. And so that resonated with a lot of owners. It didn't resonate with all of them in the beginning, right? It was easier for them to hire a bigger platform. But the ones that hired us, they saw that solution work, they saw that customization work, and it was, and it kind of took off from there.
I love that. Like we spend some time on that in the program, really trying to see how well we understand the problem that the customer has. Sometimes we can get enamored with our solution and then try and shoehorn our solution into a customer segment. And I love what you're saying, especially at the beginning, that really with clarity and specificity, spending time on the problem that your customer has, and then saying it back to them. That's really cool to be able to find the right messaging where you say back to them, here's the problem that you have. And if you got it right, it's like, they're like, I can't believe that they know me that well. They must understand the solution too. Have you had to do that at any kind of scale? Is that a thing that you go on and do as the markets grow, that kind of customized specificity around problem? Or do you find that people have similar problems? How do you do that at any kind of?
I mean, there are some issues that are similar, for a building owner that, they've got a vacancy, they're having trouble leasing, or they've got, cost issues in their management side or what have you. But, what strikes me too is that, and one of the things I really push on in business, but also in my personal life, my faith life, and what have you, and that is that my experience is that people stop 2 or 3 steps too soon. They think they've got it. They think they have the solution, right? Or they think they know the answer to the problem. And if they would just push a little bit harder, you may be right. But what I have found that if you can go that second and third step beyond kind of where you would naturally stop, boy, man, things just pop and illuminate. And sometimes that problem that you think you're solving isn't the right problem. Sometimes the customer won't tell you that too, by the way, right? Their motivations behind that problem may be something 100% personal, 100% money motivated. I mean, there's so many other things that can drive that if you're not pushing into it a little bit further, that you won't ever find. And one of the things that I pound on, right? I mean, is that, when you look at these equations that you're trying to solve, if the data is wrong in any part of that equation, every decision I make past that point is wrong, right? Everything that I do past that point is wrong. So I really have to focus on, and particularly, I think as you're starting it out, when we think about the difficult decisions that we make, I really try to break things down into, what do I absolutely know, right? What is truth, right? What is the truth around this situation? Again, this applies in my personal life, my business life. What is the truth? What do I know for certain? What do I think I know? But I'm not. I can't say that's 100%, right? I can't say what's in that bucket. And then the third bucket is what's like 100% speculative, right? And so, and I'm not saying there's an equation that says, well, when I get to 51% here and 25, then we go. But it just helps you frame the issue is to really kind of, particularly in these difficult decisions that you're all going to make as entrepreneurs, is what do I absolutely know? And try to build my decision making off of that. But in order to do that, you've got to go 2 to 3 steps beyond where I would tell you everybody else stops, right? And it's so hard, and it's hard, right? Because people don't want to stop and think, right? Really stop and think. We've all kind of lost that skill a little bit to pause and say, you know what, I'm going to sit in this room for an hour and I'm just going to think about this, or I'm going to bring in, Nick or somebody else, and we're going to wrestle with this thing. We may exit the room exactly the same spot, but at least we'll have more confidence in that spot than we did when we started.
Yeah, actually, I'm really glad that you talked about this. Was that of continuing to go through the issues and understanding that sometimes customers, they'll tell you their problems. Sometimes there's components of it that they'll hide. And then also there's components of it that are attached to things outside of the business, right? Which is interesting, right? So one of the things, we go in, we say, hey, here I have this thing. Look at it. It solves a clear need. You need X, it solves Y. But then it stalls and you don't understand, well, why aren't they buying it? And one of the things we talk to our entrepreneurs about is that there are other variables around it that you have to discover that are attached to that. So is it, for example, yes, okay, it's technically a great solution. It's a solution that solves a problem, but is there a technical fear or debt or burden attached to executing the solution that you have to account for that drives your decision to buy it? Is there a psychological thing, right? Is there a culture thing, right? Are you implementing something highly technical into a culture that is not highly technical, and therefore the adoption of it and the pushback on the solution will be problematic? So taking the opportunity to not just stop at, is it a clear business case, but to keep moving through the channel and to keep asking more and more questions will help. Is helpful. So I really appreciate you for bringing that out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and I think this is relevant to the folks kind of starting out. I mean, I can remember those first, golly, even 5 years. The number of moral victories that we had, right? Where we would get the call from the client and they would say, "You were the best pitch we ever had. You are the most talented. There's no question you're the best. We're not going to hire you." Right. I mean, that's when stuff goes against the wall, right? I mean, you're like, come on, like, what do you mean? That doesn't even make sense. And what the motivation is that individual that was hiring didn't want to risk their job on us. They have a problem to solve. And it's easy to hire CB. They're a big platform, and you can just say, "Well, I hired CB. They're a big platform, right?" And so, the number of times we heard that, and we still hear it every now and then. You're just like, that's a grind. That is a grind when you had the best pitch, you had the best solution. Quite frankly, they're probably going to take your solution and go use it with the other group. And they tell you, right? They have the audacity to call you up and say, "You were the best and we're not going to hire you." I mean, that's frustrating as an entrepreneur. That can cause some sleepless nights and some anger and some frustration. But for us, it just kept us motivated. And in some sense, we talk about it today. We're a firm that today is 14 years old, but we don't want to lose that edge. I mean, we still have a little bit of a chip on our shoulder. We're still battling the big global giants out there. In some markets, we're beating them really well. In other markets, they're beating us. And so there's a little bit of an edge there that I don't think we try not to lose in our culture.
Yeah, there's one of the things that we have our entrepreneurs go through a thing called a customer persona. And when you're selling to an enterprise at an enterprise level, or even an individual level, like there's certain characteristics that you want to plug out of there in order to understand, get a picture on who that customer is or that business is, so you can target them squarely. But in all cases, there's a human in there, and there's a line, there's a group of questions at the bottom around challenges and biggest fears, right? And oftentimes when I see entrepreneurs approach those two columns, that they always think of the challenges and the fears as just from a business perspective, but they never think about it in terms of the human perspective, which is what you just said, is that the reason why is like you checked all the boxes, but the one box that wasn't checked was the fears or the challenges maybe for the individual. And the fact that maybe there's a high pressure on them to maintain a job, or they're highly, like whatever that is. And so that's a fear. Like I need to ensure that that this solution satisfies something that won't cause me to lose my job or to lose credit or whatever it is. And so that made me, when you brought that up, I was like, that's why we push people to look at the psychological components of the biggest challenges and the biggest fears, because those can be impediments to selling a solution if you don't address.
Well, and we talk about it. I mean, if you look at our brand, you'll see it's personal in it, and that's not corporate hooey for us, right? I mean, it was born out of a discussion we had many years ago with our partners, where we were talking about it, and then we were talking about what we knew we had something different, but we were struggling with kind of how do we describe that. And the short version is one of our partners kind of gave this speech, and they said, who appreciates the car more, the 16-year-old that got a brand new car on their birthday, or the one that mowed 1,000 lawns to buy that car? Who's going to appreciate that car more? And it kind of really resonated with us that, like, that's kind of what we've done, right? I mean, we've built this thing from the ground up. It's very personal to us, but it's a reminder that when that one person took a shot on us, like, we got to honor that. Right? They took a shot on us. We know, and particularly early on, that they were taking a risk by hiring us. Boy, we better honor that. We better really fight to kind of solve their problem and to serve them well. And if you can keep that mindset in the company, and we try really hard to keep it, that it is a personal experience, that it's really powerful. And look, all business is personal. I mean, it is all personal. It is human interactions, good days and bad days. It's all personal. And in some sense, I gave a talk a long time ago to our team that, when somebody says it's just business, like, that's not somebody we want to do business with. It is personal, right? My friends are here, my partners are here. A lot of my clients have become friends. Like, that's the beauty of kind of having a business that maybe thinks more broadly than just, how much money did we make this year?
Yeah, that's excellent, man. Oh man, this is such a good talk. And I
can keep going. I'm sorry I screwed up on my headset.
Oh no, we got to honor 10 o'clock cut off. But I wanna give you one thing, and then I want to open it up to the fellows who have some questions. Like, I see Monique pop something in there, like, how do you price that, right? But just one question. You've given a lot of nuggets of wisdom. Is there any other wisdom that you would want to give to entrepreneurs, or expand on something you've already said before we jump to Q&A?
Yeah, there's a ton of it. I mean, that we keep learning, right? I mean, I said that worst thing is the best thing. I mean, that has happened over and over and over in our company. I mean, and we can point to it, and we talk about it. It's part of the stories of our company that, hey, this thing happened and we thought it was, the death knell, and it wasn't. Like, it ended up being the best thing. And we've tried to remember that when we have those other moments, like COVID, was a worst thing. Deals that we tried to pursue that didn't happen, but led to something bigger. mean, we talk about it all the time, and some of that's a function of our faith and kind of how our worldview, but we talk about that, and I think as an entrepreneur, that's going to happen, right? You're going to have these moments where, you know, it's the deal that you've been waiting for, it's the customer that you've been waiting for, and you pour a year into it and you don't get it, right? I mean, that is part of the story of being an entrepreneur, and entering this big unknown. But I would say, you know, outside of the tactical stuff, which, you know, we could spend a whole bunch of hours, and I know you guys spend a lot of time on in terms of product development and customer research and I mean, I could see it just in the elevator speeches that you all, you know, you guys have been working on it. I would say this though, what I've learned is that, and I literally, my partners would tell you they've heard it before, they get sick of hearing it, but I'm never going to stop saying it, that at some point when you get to scale, whatever scale is for you, meaning I'm sustainable, right? This is, I can live and have an impact and provide, you know, for whatever that scale point. The enemy is always within. I mean, we've gotten to a point where our biggest issue is not that the big global platforms are going to take us down. They can't, right? They really can't, you know, at this point. It is always us, right? And where we have our biggest challenges, it's when, you know, greed pops up, ego pops up, arrogance pops up, infighting pops up. I mean, we're always our greatest enemy. And we acknowledge it, like we talk about it, right? I mean, we try to create a lot of awareness around that, you know, within the company, that, you know, it's not the outside forces, it's us, right? You know, what's the biggest problem? It's me, right? It's me. And so if I don't have awareness of that when you're building a company, those are usually when things, you know, when you lose awareness of that, that's when your culture changes. That's when you may become, you know, something else as a company. And that's when you lose your competitive edge, at least from our vantage point, when we lose that, when we lose that awareness of it. It doesn't mean we can't be excellent at what we do. It doesn't mean we can't be really profitable at what we do. It doesn't mean we can't, you know, create a lot of opportunity, economic opportunity. But boy, the enemy is always inside, kind of creeping around, you know, in our view.
Yeah, man, that's good. There's been some questions. I saw Monique had a question. Ken Peach had a question. Probably a couple other questions. Monique, Ken, do you want to chime in on your questions?
Yeah, I just had a question. You were saying that, you know, you were started with the customization, and that's not a scalable model, but also in order for your team to really be focused, like there has to be pricing around that. So I'm just trying to understand like how you set that original pricing for the customization, and then how you decided to go from that to scaling your pricing to make it more sustainable. Yeah.
I would tell you, you know, in our space, though, a lot of the pricing is set. So we're not building widgets. We're building buildings. But our services, a lot of the pricing is kind of set, right? In terms of the fees, you know, the commissions and the property management fees and the construction management fees and the development fees, they're kind of set by market. You know, you can push those fees in certain areas and certain sectors of our business if you're providing something that they can't get elsewhere. So we look for those areas, and that's, you know, when you'll start to see our waterfalls change. But for the most part, the pricing in our space is set. Now, that doesn't mean, I mean, particularly early on, we've been very conscious of not like just trying to, hey, we'll do it for free or we'll undercut it, you know, just to get the business. Early on, we did a little bit of that, but it rarely works out well. But for us, the pricing is set. So when I talk about customization, I'm really more focused on the solution, right? Like I'm going to customize a solution for this issue, and if that makes sense, right? So it is scalable for us because in large part, the pricing is kind of already set in our spaces.
Paul, it's Ken. I've been 10 years at the Health Council, which is a nonprofit, and I've had to reinvent it 3 times. And the third invention is Caramedics, this model that seems to really be taking off for us. What do you watch? Is there an external thing that says to you, you mentioned 18 to 24 months. I'm wondering what it is that you watch that says, okay, it's time to move in a different direction or introduce something new. I know for our sake, it was change in customer demand and what was happening in the environment, but any specific things that make you reinvent every 18 to 24 months?
It's really more indicators within the team. So, I have a really strong, group of folks that we all lead the business together. Again, I have this title. It's still kind of weird to me, this title. I mean, it feels goofy. I've got, now I've got 44 partners in the business. I've got 7 individuals that are kind of key, leadership folks, and we work together. It's really more indicators within the team. That's kind of what I'm watching. Our governance, might need to change. How we operate the business might need to change. Some of the things, that we set down as standards early on, we've held to. But it's really indicators from the team. And it's managing a thing that's very large now, right? Again, it's not. These are numbers that are beyond what we ever imagined. They're not. I mean, if you had told me, 10 years ago we were going to have 400 employees, I'd be like, that seems, nuts, right? We have, this is crazy. We have $2.5 billion worth of joint ventures now that we have our own capital in. That's not something I ever contemplated. Well, when you start crossing those lines, you are running a much different company. But we've been able to, we really do focus a lot on kind of holding on to the culture in that. And that's, if there's one thing that can't change, we can improve, we can get better, we can have awareness around it, but like we have to hold on to that culture as we get bigger.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So good, Paul. Anybody else?
Yeah, good question. Hey, Paul.
Hey, Gordon.
And so you were mentioning, and I really liked the position that you took on when you were pitching to potential clients, really kind of like not talking about how large you guys are and so forth, but really just kind of focusing in on what you guys expect to be the core problem that client is facing. And Ben, you were saying like, if you get that question right and you can just, and then everything's going to click in that meeting and they're going to be really excited to kind of have that discussion with you and to really just kind of start diving into solutions and brainstorming around that. But if you get that wrong, then, you might lose their attention immediately because they're like, well, you've missed the mark here, or you have no idea what we're even like having an issue with. So my question was like, I'm assuming there's just like a ton of like client research or like, market research that you guys are doing. You mentioned that a lot of these potential clients have very similar problem sets. And so you could probably kind of lean on the commonality between them all, but I didn't know like how do you like go into a meeting like with confidence and pitching a solution to a problem that you're not 100% certain like that's there, unless those clients do come to you and say, hey, we're having a problem with this, like can you come in and tell me how you help fix it? I was just wondering if you could just kind of touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a pat answer for that, right? We have been very intentional about trying to build something different, and I can explain it to you. It may not resonate with you if you don't understand the commercial real estate space, but the development and investment business and the services business, the way they work together is different than every other company that does it, right? We don't have many groups put a wall between those groups for fiduciary reasons. We've actually said, no, we're going to do it together. And that ultimately provides deal flow for our customer base, right? And our customers are insurance companies and pension funds that have to place capital every year into the markets, and we help provide them investments to place that capital. And so some of the, that's a very different thing that I just like gleaned over that I could spend another hour on, right? Why we do it this way. So that gives us an edge. That gives us a little bit of an edge when we enter some of these conversations. I think for us though, Gordon, the customer problem, again, there's some uniformity across that in our space, right? I have a vacancy, I have a problem with the building, I have something I need to get built, and I'm struggling with the local municipalities. I'm relying on the GC, and I need somebody in between. I mean, some of those things are very similar, but I think it's the best way that I know how to do it. It's not some big tactical data research. It's like, I just need to talk to the customer, right? And not pitch, right? Not pitch. I just need to spend time with the individual making that decision and say, okay, tell me what you're struggling with. And here's what I will commit to you. If I can't solve the problem, I'll help you figure out how to go solve the problem. I'll find somebody to help you solve the problem, right? And so I'm not pitching, but I'm sounding a little manipulative, right? I mean, it's the non-pitch pitch, but I'm sincere in it. And I think most of our folks are sincere in it, that, hey, let us help really understand your problem. And I may not be the right solution for you, but I will probably know somebody who is the right solution, and I'll help you get there.
So like in those initial pitches, like you really are doing like active discovery with.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Totally. Yeah, totally. I mean, and it's tough to, sometimes you can run into a buzzsaw there, right? And it's like you're asking all these questions, and then finally the customer goes, "Oh, when are you going to pitch us?" It's like, okay, we're not going to win this one. I just know it. I mean, we're not going to win that one, but I think, if you have the opportunity to have conversations with those potential customers well before you're actively giving a proposal, that's the best data research you can. And if you can neutralize the environment a little bit, to say, I just want to talk to you about it, right? I mean, I don't want to waste your time. You don't, and I promise I won't waste yours. I just want to understand really what you're looking for. And I may be the right solution, I may not. That's hard too when you're in go mode and you want to hunt and kill everything, right? As you're building a business, but boy, it pays off, right? Because when you get that one customer that says, okay, I'm going to tell you my problem, and then you actually end up solving it, boy, you've got a customer that's going to help you as well, help you grow, and they will make calls for you. Yeah,
word of mouth traction.
You get that flywheel, right? And we talk about the flywheel all the time in our business, that the more that we can kind of fill in those components, the faster the wheel turns. Amazon talks about it a lot in some of their writings as well. And we talk about it a lot in our business.
Well, Paul, listen, man, this is awesome. I knew this conversation was going to be fire. And I appreciate you being open about where you started, motivation. You've given a lot of great nuggets, and I feel good because like we get to share this with the world, and people get to see what's here in Orlando, that people like you exist here, and but they have to come here in order to tap into it. So thanks, man, for your time, and I really appreciate you for sharing this with our fellows and the world.
Happy to be a part of it, and in all sincerity, if I can spend time with anybody, on deeper questions, I'm more than happy to do that.